And so as we go to launch and go to start into the Innovation Summit, our next guest is a gentleman by the name of Drew Corbett. And Drew Corbett is actually part of Healthbox. And Healthbox is actually an HIMSS innovation company. For those of you not aware, so HIMSS actually has about 7 or 8 offshoots when it comes to actually consulting and products and solutions that we develop. So now for our actually next speaker, I'm going to introduce Drew Corbett. And when he comes up here, we'll switch over to the slides. Thank you.
Thank you very much, so much for having me. Every time I'm in Seattle, I get cobalt blue skies, so I don't know if Board of Tourism can start subsidizing some of my trips here, but it's a beautiful day. It looks just like it does in my hometown of Denver, so thank you so much for having me. So I'm going to take a quick pause, and is this the slide clicker? Okay. Next. I'll come back to my original introduction in a moment, but yesterday at 3 p.m. I boarded a flight in Denver, and I came out here, and I got into my hotel room, and within moments, I came down with food poisoning. So, for the two in the back that saw me eating club crackers, now you know why. But this actually has a little bit of a conduit to our discussion today. Within less than 45 minutes, I was able to participate in the innovation community that I speak on so often. Is anyone familiar with Dispatch Health? Yes. A couple? A few? So Dispatch Health is actually a Colorado company operating in 15 markets. I was on the phone with Dispatch and told them my symptoms, and again, within about 30 minutes, I had 2 caregivers in my hotel room giving me an IV drip, so that I wouldn't have to punt on speaking with all of you today. I think we'll come back to some of the trends on consumerism, but start thinking like this, and I was forced to start thinking like this morning. This is where we're going, and that's a lot of what we want to talk to you about innovation today. So, to our regularly scheduled program, and my actual introduction, I'm incredibly humbled to be able to speak with you all today. I know you have a huge agenda, and my hope is that this can get your brains going in a really exciting direction to start off today. I have a 4-month-old daughter, and this is my first time away with her. And what I was going to say was, it's great how quiet a hotel room is when you can get away from the newborns, but I am unfortunately yet to actually experience that. So when I learned I was coming out here, I realized that I only knew a couple of things about Washington, one of which is our policy standards on recreational marijuana, and I thought we should have a broader discussion than that, and so I took to learning. And realized that in the spirit of innovation, I don't think we could be in a better place. So I knew the origins of Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos and Howard Schultz as business people, but I learned about Jimi Hendrix and Bing Crosby, Sonora Dodd's creation of Father's Day in 1910 in Washington, the Enola Gay, the women who kept Boeing alive during the war, Bertha Knight, the first female mayor of a major city in 1926, Paul Allen, Doppler ultrasound, bone marrow transplants, Pearl Jam, vinyl records, 8 national parks, 68 state parks, the invention of the backpack, and cinema. So, if those aren't enough innovations to get us started, then we'll see where we can go from here. Do you know why, at least part of why, there is such a strong spirit of innovation in Washington and in Western states in general? I was working at a small digital health company in Denver, Colorado in 2012. I was supporting United Healthcare in California, and I was having dinner with the vice president of marketing for United Healthcare, and he said that there are maybe 2 or 3 times a year where in the era before 24-hour connectedness, somebody in California would have to make a business decision. And back east, or in their case, Central Time, all of the corporate headquarters had gone home. And so we just get these little slivers where someone would say, let's up the budget for that department that seems really inspired for this coming year, and sort of do that off the books. Let's say yes to the client that we think is leading the market, and make a promise that we're going to have to commit to over the next year. I thought that was such an interesting and nuanced way to think about why we cultivate so much here, and I hope, despite your iPhones going off in the middle of the night, that you can maybe still take the liberties to step away and make some of those gut judgment calls that help push us forward. So if you read Harvard Business School's Clayton Christensen at all, you are likely familiar with the concept of disruption, and we talk about that in tandem with innovation. It typically happens from outside entities. And it happens from entrepreneurs that are trying to change things in the way that we operate our businesses. So therein lies the challenge for many of us in this room who work at really significant incumbent organizations in the healthcare ecosystem. Right? We are not necessarily the new entrants, and yet we are still being asked to disrupt. And according to Christensen, that is one of the hardest things an organization can do, is to disrupt yourself. But now more than ever, we are seeing it as being something that is imperative and critical for all of us. So disruption and innovation themselves may seem like scary words when you think about your organizations. You may say, well, yes, we're big and we're powerful and we have seismic market reach, but we also feel slow, or we feel bureaucratic, and everything I read about in the press feels like it's moving so much faster than I'm able to. It's in the face of those types of obstacles that I want to set the scene for the rest of our dialogue here and talk about how we as incumbents can really be the catalyst for change amongst the healthcare organizations of the world. So let's start by grounding ourselves in a common definition of disruption. And like the word innovation, this is probably something that you all feel completely immersed and saturated in. It's in press, it's in boardrooms. I wouldn't be surprised if it's even in tactical and operational meetings. And oftentimes we don't really even know what we're saying, we just know that we need to say it. We just know that we have to be innovating regardless of what that looks like. So let me just do a quick poll. How many people, quick show of hands, feel as though you are a disruptor in healthcare these days? Okay? And how many feel that you are being disrupted in healthcare these days? Okay, so quite a few more. And I would guess there are probably a lot of those that are in the middle too. So in business, a disruptive innovation is one that creates a new market and value chain and displaces an existing market and value chain. It displaces market-leading firms, products, and alliances. An incumbent's disruptive process, so all of our disruptive processes, they may feel like they take longer than those of new entrants, but the reminder is once we have scale and once we are actually penetrating those markets, we're able to reach far more broadly and have an impact far more quickly. So remember some of these tenets as we think about what did I just read from a new startup. It will take them so much longer to reach the amount of people that you all have the capacity to reach than they could in 5 years. And so we need to leverage those things to our advantage. This definition really applies to any industry, and that includes healthcare. It's particularly salient when we think about popular consumer companies outside of healthcare that are encroaching on our traditional space. So if we're thinking of Fitbit, if we're thinking of Peloton, if we're thinking of any of those. And this is exactly why the digital health buzz has taught us. So Fitbit may be a really interesting company, and we may all be wearing it as consumers, but to me, those things get really interesting when it's in partnership with maybe a health plan that starts to actuate the data to become truly different for healthcare, right? So it wasn't the technology itself, it was operating through the business of the incumbents that became an interesting technology. So we'll start with this with a non-healthcare example. If we go back in time before the internet was mainstream, we as American sports fans, we got our news from a few places. We either watched the game, we maybe heard it on the radio. If we were lucky, the most connected we probably were was getting a phone call from somebody who was at the big game. Right? But everything was really compartmentalized and really gate-kept in terms of our access to understanding these things. So if we fast forward and we look at the advent of the internet, the image on the left is ESPN.com back in the late 90s. So we may laugh at those graphics and how horrible that experience is for a consumer product at this point, but think about how seismic the difference was in terms of the industry that shook below it, right? We now didn't have a 24-hour cycle for the new news, we had a much more expedient cycle for the new news. We also have people accessing from many more places than they were able to even 15 years or so before there may have been an iPhone in someone's hands. So it wasn't just the technology that changed here, the ad revenue changed, the analytics changed, the whole business changed, and that's what ESPN recognized in moving on this so early and so often. But there was still this gatekeeper component, right? So everything about sports, there was still fans, and then there were press passes, and then there were media organizations. And so we enter another era of disruption with our social media. Fans now have a way to engage with the game in ways they never have before, and if you don't engage that way as a traditional media organization, you are likely not going to succeed. If you really embrace it, you have the chance to make your footprint even broader than the local market that you may have succeeded in for years. So what's interesting with this is that the incumbent players haven't changed. ESPN still has an Instagram handle, right? That's still how their reporters are posting news. What's changed is the environment is murkier. They're competing with consumers for consumers. They are no longer gatekeepers to the goods that they provide, and in that way I think we can start to feel a little bit of relation and correlation to the healthcare environment. So many of us have seen and heard this before, but I do think it bears repeating. Neither Redbox nor Netflix are even on the radar screen in terms of competition. And that's Blockbuster back in 2008. Is there anyone who wishes they hadn't said something publicly that Jim Keys did in 2008? So the point here is we don't want to be organizations that are primarily remembered for historically turning our backs on disruption and innovation, right? The key point here is you don't have to be looking at every single new player or every single new entrant. What you have to be doing is recognizing the trends and why there are new players or new entrants. And stopping and saying, does this say more about me than it does about them? What are the cracks that they're seeing in my pavement that they're trying to fill? Right, so that's hopefully what we learned from Jim. So I think it's important to have some historical context as to what innovation has looked like across industries and across decades. So if we're looking at some of the major market dynamics and major market forces and who the players were that benefited from those forces, this is a nice way to look at it. We have an age of manufacturing from the early 1900s to 1960. And in that era, we saw the likes of Ford and Boeing and RCA and GE really thrive. What we also see is towards the end of that era, they start to fade away. And if we were to look at Fortune 500s over that time period, we would see them gradually fall as the disruption of technology came into place. So in the 1960s to the 1990s, we see that age of distribution, and people who really knew logistics and had consumer access started to be a little bit closer to the top of the pile. So the UPSs, certainly the Walmarts for a very long time, Toyota in many ways too. 1990 to 2010, the age of information. I would argue that the second or the last two columns here are probably blending into one. And if we look back in history 50 years from now, they will probably be one and the same, moving on to that age of the customer. And those are the ones that we very much live in now. That age of information, I think Blockbuster represented, to refer to them again, a really nice example of someone who held data and they could distribute that data in the form of media, but they were certainly on the early end, and for that reason we see Netflix proceeding. So going back to healthcare now, a great example of disruption in the medical field has been imaging in general. So if we think about the advent of X-ray, you probably had people saying this has got to be either magic or witchcraft. For us to be able to look into a human body and know what's there without cutting it open at the time would have been thought as completely nuts. And now it's so commonplace for us. So when X-ray was invented, you saw three cohorts of reactions to it. The first one was people who didn't quite buy it, and they said, that's interesting, but I'm not really paying attention to it relative to what I'm doing. The second group were adopters of the technology, and they said, this is interesting, this is new, we feel like we can benefit from this, and so they bought. But the smartest people in the room were the ones that said, it's not X-ray, it's radiology. And where is that going? So the hospitals in this case that set up radiology departments within a year of the advent of X-ray, they were best positioned to grab all of these technologies as it turned into MRI and CT and others later. Now, of course, everyone has caught up with this, but the point remains there were decades where those who really identified radiology as the future of business, those were the people that succeeded, not just the ones that swiped the card and bought the X-ray. So my goal with a number of these examples is not necessarily to scare you, although I do hope that they instill a little bit of urgency and a little bit of fear, but rather to show how incredibly possible, and I would say incredibly inevitable, innovations will be. And that is where it leaves it all to us. Where do we want to fall in terms of the historical perspective on did we win because we leveraged? Were we thoughtful about the technologies that were coming? Or did we put our heads in the sand? And did we try to pretend that business tomorrow would be the same as business yesterday? So we think about disruption in two ways, incumbents and new entrants. And the really interesting thing going on now is that our incumbents are not startups. And for a long time, even if we go back 4 or 5 years, our incumbents were what you saw coming out of what you saw coming out of NEA venture capital firms. It was not the Fortune top 5. And that's what I think is so fascinating as a student of business about what's going on in healthcare right now, is we have the clash of the titans. The ones on this list in the Fortune top 10 that are healthcare entities are not the ones that had the most exciting press releases this week. And to reiterate this week, if you don't think we are absolutely in the eye of the storm in the most fun and fascinating way, pay attention to the recency of some of the examples that we'll give here. So, Amazon, who read about Amazon Care on Tuesday? Tuesday of this week, I had to change my whole presentation. Before the whole sickness thing even happened. So, Amazon Care, for those who didn't read, is a Seattle-based pilot for Amazon employees that effectively provides on-site primary care, telemedicine platforms, and what is being written about as an extension for nurse in the home. So a lot of what I experienced this morning, I haven't used Dispatch Health. If by chance I had been with Amazon, that's probably the platform that I would have used for this. So that's not an unremarkable size of a population for a pilot. I don't know exactly what the employee count in the Seattle offices are, but obviously considering the scale that they have, that's a lot of people. That's a lot of outpatient visits that are going to happen under a different brand that people associate differently than their traditional caregivers. With Apple, we got a new Apple Watch earlier this month. We're a little bit more healthcare enabled on that one. It's not seismically different, but it is a little bit easier. It drops the price point on still healthcare enabled watches. And if you haven't been there, apple.com/healthcare is a live website. There's no question that however they start to look at this industry, their technology, their reach, and also the privacy principles that remain germane to Apple, I think have a particularly strong pivot point within healthcare. Something that we see differently than you might with an Amazon or a Walmart. And that brings us to Walmart, which I actually think is one of the most exciting movers, again this week, again another revision of my slides, in terms of what they are announcing. So I read this in Beckers, but Walmart has realized that they have 1.5 million employees that live and reside and work in all of these relatively rural places, or many of them do. And for all of us healthcare folks, we know that that is exactly where we're having so many challenges accessing people, and that's why we've seen such a proliferation of our telemedicine platforms in part. So Walmart has said through Live Better You that we can start to provide degrees, and these are not medical degrees, this is a much lower acuity than that. So if we're looking at like vision tests, things like that, but can we send those people to Live Better You to start providing early healthcare services in Walmart clinics by our own existing staff? So if we think about trends in our business, we have shortages of workforce, we have a challenge to access consumers as consumers, and Walmart has said, I think we got both of those. And I think that is a fascinating pivot point. I'm really excited to watch where that goes. This is all outside of Walmart's other recent announcement that they've opened a primary care like clinic in their facilities in Georgia. I don't know what's this, as a side note, I don't know what's going on in Georgia, but that's also where Burger King decided to pilot their Impossible Burger, which is now scaling, which I think is a much bigger healthcare story than it was really made out to be, but I think that's great also. Impossible Burger fans, is that what I'm hearing? So now that we're all sufficiently scared, let's talk about the incumbents, and that's the other side of where we said disruption can come from. So these are just a couple of examples. Some of them you'll have the opportunity to hear speak later today in Providence, St. Joseph. But when we look at Blue KC operating as a provider, but as a small Midwest payer, when we look at CVS and an acquisition of Anthem, and looking at retail and payer within, Optum, of course, has become the more profitable, more lean, better running than United Healthcare within the United Health Group, and is even selling services to hospitals that are not contracted with United. I think that's one of the best examples I can think of Christensen's reference to, can we disrupt from within? I don't even know that we really think about Optum, outside of knowing they're part of the United Health Group, really being a part of the United Health Group. They've become that independent and autonomous for their success. So we're going to get into it a little bit more tactical. Blue KC, which I mentioned on the last slide, had an innovation team that Healthbox was lucky enough to work with that said to their senior leadership, it is not easygoing being a small or mid-market health plan, and if we want to succeed or thrive in this environment, we have to do things differently. So they had started, along with the narrow network product, a series of ambulatory clinics around the Kansas City area. Now, whether or not this ends up working is, I think, one, it's still to be seen, and two, I don't know if I would bet on it necessarily. What's interesting is that the innovation team said, if we're going to move, we got to jump all the way in. This can't be peripheral, it can't just be our billboards, we have to go to the core of our business and do something differently. I think this is one of the biggest challenges for incumbents as they try to innovate, is they're saying we're going to dip a toe and we're going to market it as swimming. It's not the same thing, and it's one of the challenges that I think all of us have, is to go back and say, are we really doing it differently? Or are we just trying to fee for service a little better? So if we're all in agreement that this is happening and we're all a little bit anxious about it, what do we do now? And I think this is where we just start to learn from Blockbuster, and we learn from not turning our back to the disruption, and we say, we know it's getting more consumer-centric. There are reasons why Walmart and Amazon and Apple are so bullish about this space. Despite how well they know that people have failed when they've tried to enter before, the tides are starting to pull in the direction of their core and their sweet spot. So, for example, this morning I went dispatch, I NPS them as a 10. Just like, I mean, it was fabulous. It's the reason why I'm able to stand here. So how do we look at getting our arms around this then? If there are a few things that I would ask you to take back to your organizations, it would be step one, let's embrace change. Let's accept that it's happening. Step two, let's actively cultivate whatever it is innovation is going to mean to us. Let's take it on proactively. And three, let's be really mindful about our build, our buy, and our partner decisions from a strategic standpoint. So we're going to return to those in a moment, but I wanted to quickly give you a frame that I use to facilitate innovation discussions with health systems all the time. So if we think about ourselves and look in the mirror and say, there's no way I'm going to effectively move forward if I try to be someone I'm not. This is to pacify that concern. So we look at this 2x2 as saying, you may be an innovation producer, you may be an innovation consumer, or you may be a hybrid of those two. And so those profiles look like this. The hybrids are groups that they know that they have the gumption, the wherewithal, the relationships to build things on their own. But they also have a really keen sense of their limitations. And so they can identify what the cut line is of we can do it, and we're going to do it, and we're going to commit to it, or we just can't. And there's a market that can do it for us cheaper. The innovation producers have invested immensely in their culture to make sure that if a problem comes their way, it's ingrained in their DNA that their employees will take it on, and they will actually be the ones to help solve that problem. And finally, innovation consumers are those that really look to outsource the innovation efforts and the heavy lifting to the broader market. I think it's important not to displace these with, this does not just mean you're pilot happy. This does not just mean you have this many logos to look at when you look at the innovative technologies you're working with. It specifically means that you would rather rely on the outside market, but your evaluation criteria is strong enough to not get lost and lose the signal for the noise. So I'm going to give a really quick example of each one of these, and then we'll close. Hospital Sisters Health System is in downstate Illinois, also now operating in Wisconsin. This is a hospital system that was founded by Franciscan nuns from Germany in 1875. So for everyone keeping score at home, it's 14 years before Washington was a state. And this is still a relevant health system today. We worked with them earlier this year on saying, what is our digital strategy going to be? They said, we know we're unique. We know that our patients are geographically displaced, they have far distances to travel, they're rural, they may not have the same technological access, but we still need a digital strategy. Not just logos, but something cohesive. So they really created the crux of this around this concept of how do we find a patient, how do we treat a patient, and how do we keep a patient. And they started to look at their assets through that lens, recognizing which ones they could do on their own, and which ones they needed to outsource to the broader market. And they're a great example of a hybrid. Cultivating innovation. I think this is probably one of the most amorphous and the most difficult things to do when we all think about what the culture of our organizations looks like. Orlando Health is a group that we've had the opportunity to work with that, better than anyone we've ever seen, is an innovation producer. So from day one, if you were a new hire, Orlando Health is saying to you, if you see a problem, it's on you first, and you're empowered to do something about it. So that could be anything from, we need to change the care transitions in the pediatrics department to, in the environmental services department, the trash can shouldn't be over there, it should be over there. But everyone is expected to bring that type of innovation to their job. Now, what ends up happening is they've attracted some physician entrepreneurs and have created highly commercializable innovations that they are now selling to the broader market. Their IP policies are fantastic. They know that what they build, they will continue to own, and then they create revenue share or cost sharing agreements with their regional entrepreneurs. Really, really exciting work they do. It needs time, we're going to have to jump quickly through there. So finally, when we think about Build My Partner, we've got some examples of each of these up on the screen. And I think, as with any of the other principles we've talked about, there's not a right answer. We would certainly trend towards being the most cautious about building. I think people oftentimes look at a marketing product and say, well, I didn't do that. You may be forgetting about implementation, and we may not all be running as agile software companies yet. Right? So it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it, but it does mean you should know yourself really well and your build competencies if you're looking to go that route. And by partnering, we feel there's so much ample opportunity in the market to be able to do that. So, Dignity Health, now Spirit Health, but at the time, implemented what I think is a really great construct, both in its simplicity and its effectiveness and its capacity to scale. So, you may have read about this one as well, but a run, jump, look. If any of the local facilities or any of the individual hospitals say, here's something I want to test out, run number one is jump in, let's pilot it. They have so many of these run version 1 things going on. They say, we just need to do some micrometrics with this. Is it usable? Does it connect? And then, if we pass those tests, we can say, run number 2, does it still work if it doesn't have huge internal champion? If we lose some of the big budget around it, can it still pilot effectively? And lastly with that, let's go to some macro metrics. I'm not worried about user NPS, I'm looking at does it reduce my 30-day readmissions, or whatever the broader metric might be. If those work, then we jump. And we implement system-wide. System-wide, which is, I think, an important one to know. So I'm going to leave you again with this construct, and I'll say, work with your organizations to know yourself. Be comfortable with being either an adopter of technologies or a producer of technologies. Recognize that you don't have to stick to one. This can change based on what you're trying to pursue. But once you do that, come back to that first principle, embrace change,